In today's video, we're talking about Dorico, the advanced music notation software brought to you by Steinberg, and why after 15 plus years of using something else, I might be switching. Hey, what's up everyone? Huei-Yuan Pan coming from Cupertino, California. Welcome to today's video, everyone. And before we get into it, today is July 12th, 2020. And we are in the thick of things, the world as we know it, that is COVID-19. So whether you're watching this video now or sometime well into the future, I hope you're well. I hope you and your family are safe and healthy. We're doing all right over here, just taking it one day at a time, just like everybody else. And I'm hoping that today's video will provide a little bit of entertainment and education with some of the things that I've been working on for the past few months. So if you're watching this video, you're probably looking at music notation software. Maybe you're a student or a teacher, maybe you're a parent of a student, but for some reason you're interested in music notation software. Now, out of those people who are interested in music notation software, you probably fall into one of three camps. You're someone who's been using notation software for a while, and you're looking at upgrading or switching to something else. You're someone who's been dabbling in notation and you're wondering what's next. Or you have no notation software experience and you're looking to jump into it. Now, why is this important? Think of this as a tool for musicians the way that a word processor would be for writers. It's a way for us to capture a thought or a sound in our head and then put it into some sort of concrete form that we can then distribute to other people. And the bounds for imagination and creativity become limitless. Now we can share what we hear, feel, and see with others. For me, this has been a way for me to create handouts to teach my students, compose and create arrangements that can be distributed to other musicians so that it can be performed, as well as build digital products that I can then monetize and distribute across the world. Hey, Future Editing Huei here. Real quick before we get any further into this video, I do want to let everyone know who's watching right now right up front and to thank Dorico for sponsoring today's video. That being said, all the things I say in this video are my personal and honest opinions. I would never say anything that I didn't really believe in or use products that I didn't believe in. So you should keep that in mind as you're watching the rest of the video. Thank you again, Dorico and Steinberg, for sponsoring this video. Now, before I share my process and experience with getting into Dorico, a little bit of context about me. Who is this guy and why should I listen to him? I don't know if you should listen to me, honestly. I'm just some guy. But I have been a musician for many, many years. I've played music my entire life, starting from a very young age. Actually went on to study music in school and then became a professional player and teacher for many, many years after that. And now I get the opportunity to work with creatives and other musicians on a regular basis. Now, whenever you talk about music notation software, people always say, oh, which one's better? Do you use Finale? Do you use Sibelius? Insert music notation software of your choice. And before we talk about what I use and what's good and what's bad, the hardest thing for people to wrap their minds around is that there's no good or bad, better or worse, because the answers can be different for every single person depending on their situation and what they're trying to do. The same thing happens when you talk about DAWs, digital audio workstations. Do you use Pro Tools? Do you use Logic? What's better? What's worse? There's no right or wrong answer. Which interface is better? Which microphones are better? It all depends on the situation, the user, and what you're using for. So when people say, is Finale better? Is Sibelius better? Is Dorico better? The answer is definitely, without a doubt, it depends. So let me share a little bit about my path so you can see where I'm coming from and map it to your current situation and see which parts apply. So I've used the big two, which most people would say are Finale and Sibelius. When I was an undergrad, Finale was the music notation software that was in our college music lab. And I just remember at the time how slow and painful inputting the notation was. There are all these different modes that you had to switch in and out of. And my friend Brian at the time, who was a couple years older than me, would show me these tricks. And he said something very simple at the time, but is actually very pertinent to the situation, which is, yes, you could learn the software by just using it over time, but you could probably learn it faster if I showed you some shortcuts and just gave you the answer so that you could get up and running sooner than later. So for the majority of my undergrad, I'm sitting in the computer station. The last couple of years, I get my first laptop. I'm creating projects. I'm submitting arranging assignments. I'm making handouts. And there are two main struggles that I had with Finale. The first being that when I opened up a template, I had an idea of what I wanted the music score to look like. But as I was typing and I would finish my score, it looked kind of like a children's book, you know, like the font was too big, things weren't sized quite right. You had to do a lot of customizing to make it look like a professionally engraved score, like the ones that I would see in orchestra or wind ensemble or any of the solo lit that I played all the time. Secondly, in order to do those engraving options, you had to meticulously search through forms and manuals, and once you even found the answer, the process was just very painstaking. You know, even like when you made a crescendo, you'd have to make it and then drag it and size it correctly. It was just a very time-consuming process to make scores look good. This brings me to the end of my undergrad where I'm on tour and I'm on the bus and I see my friend Matt, who is the cutting edge technology music guy. He had a laptop on the bus, which was not the norm at the time. I mean, we barely had cell phones at this time, so it gives you an idea of the kind of guy that Matt is. Matt, what's up if you happen to be watching this? Matt is on his laptop and he's creating some music score, and I see him just plunking notes, and the notes are just going, and they're just coming out across the screen. I go, what are you writing in? And he goes like, oh, this is Sibelius. And at that time, you're either in the finale camp or you're in the Sibelius camp. And it was always which one's better, which one's worse. And if you'll remember from the beginning of the video, there is no better or worse. It's just what's best for you. So Matt starts showing me Sibelius, and I remember the very first few things that he showed me. He showed me Command and Paste, Command C, Command V, which makes perfect sense, just like a word processor. Then he showed me that if I wanted to repeat a segment of a rhythm or an entire bar, I could just highlight it and hit R. And then he showed me that if I wanted to create a crescendo, I could just highlight where I wanted the crescendo to be and tap H. If I wanted a decrescendo, Shift H. So I go home that summer, I go to the campus bookstore, I purchase a box set of the CDs that are needed to download the software, which was a ton of money for me as a poor music student. So frugal at the time that I would occasionally cut my own hair, which this is actually a Corona cut that you're seeing right now. Who knew that random skill set would come in handy 15 years later? But this software was really expensive for me at the time, but I imagined what I could do with it, which at that time my main focus was to get into writing music. Not so much composing original music at the time, mostly doing arrangements. I'm a percussionist, and one of the ways that you could make some extra bread on the side when you weren't teaching private lessons, you could do the battery or the front ensemble arrangements for the groups that you were teaching. Sometimes that would be a few extra $100, eventually a few extra $1,000 that you could be making per semester. This was also around the time when I was taking my education classes, and something my professor said to me at the time was, one of the best things a teacher can do is make custom handouts for their students. The teachers are going to know best what their students need, the things that they need to be working on, and then instead of trying to find a tool to solve that problem, this is something that I apply to everything that I do now, is that just custom make the thing that you need, because that's going to fit exactly the problem that you have. So I'm teaching at the time, I'm making handouts for my students, I start getting into arranging, and at this time I go off to study for my master's, I'm the TA of the marching band, and I'm writing the percussion arrangements for every show. Oh, it is so funny. I think back to how little I knew then and how basically everything I was doing at that time was just figuring it out as I went. As the jobs got bigger, I had to develop more sophisticated engraving skills, specialty articulations, beaming across the grand staff, things that required me to go into the Sibelius forum and read threads and figure out the answer of how to do things. This is part of the process of learning any new software. And it's not so much about, is the software easy or hard to use? What happens is you get better at learning new software. So the intuitive part of using any software is very important. Does it fit the conventions that we're accustomed to? But as you learn pieces of software, and in this instance Sibelius, the skill that you're also acquiring is the process of learning how to learn. So I got really good at looking up the answer for how to do things that I didn't know how to do in Sibelius. So much so, by the time I start teaching high school, I'm using Sibelius to teach AP Music Theory classes. I'm doing bigger arrangements for an entire band, for an entire orchestra, to the point where when I moved to Los Angeles, I began to write my own compositions, preparing classical and pop arrangement scores, using Sibelius to create professional engravings that I can put into papers and handouts, to ultimately figuring out how to use this tool to package up the ideas and experiences that I've had as a performer and as a teacher into digital products that I can share for free online, or even package up and monetize as digital products, which is a whole other ballgame, because now as an artist, you're moving out of what we most customarily see, which is trading time for dollars, into now creating assets that can continue to generate revenue for you over time. So a lot happens those last couple years in Los Angeles. I move into digital products, video courses, a lot of other stuff. And now we're in 2020, and a little bit of foreshadowing of one of the things I'm going to talk about later in this video, which is my old computer, trusty MacBook Pro that's been with me for over 6 years at this point, begins to poop out and I get a new machine. So there's been this period of time for about 1.5 years now where I'm operating on my new machine. Every time I need to do some sort of notation, I go back to my old machine. At first, this is not a big deal. One day, my old Mac basically explodes. It still works when you plug it in, but it's literally a ticking time bomb. And the other detail of the story, I never upgraded out of Sibelius 6, which for Sibelius 6 users, you know that there was a big change from 6 to 7, and basically 6 was always able to do everything that I needed it to do, and sometimes better than what ended up happening for some of the users who went on to 7 and 7.5 and on and on. Anyway, what you need to know for the story is old machine, new machine. Old machine is running Sibelius 6. New machine, plot twist, cannot install Sibelius 6. So now I'm at the crossroads. Do I install the current version of Sibelius, which is new to me, on my new machine and learn a new workflow? Or do I try out this new software that I keep hearing about called Dorico? So a couple things finally pushed me over the edge to give Dorico a shot. First, I have a couple friends that I always look to who are on the cutting edge of technology, what's going on in the industry, keeping things up to date. Again, Matt, Eric, Lloyd, Brian. Hey guys, what's up if you haven't been watching this? And everyone's saying good things about Dorico. So you've never heard about them before, or you just keep hearing people kind of talking about them. And the way I describe it is that everyone is standing around the pool, everyone sees the pool, everyone's talking about the pool, but there's only a few people that I know in my circle of musician friends and teachers who are actually jumping in and giving it a shot. So this takes me to a month and a half ago, and I decided to give Dorico a shot. It's a unique situation because I don't have any time-sensitive projects where I have to create really big or extensive works. The work that I am doing just involves basic input and editing. So with the basic, like, hey, let's get up and running, I'm able to work and still struggle, but at least produce the things that I need to be producing. And here are the things that I've kind of picked up over the last month and a half as I've been going through this process. First off, there's a free version of Dorico called Dorico SE. You can download it for free. And there are videos and documentation that'll walk you through the installation process. Once you're in, you're basically ready to start using the program. I basically learned 80% of what I need to be able to do using the free version of Dorico, which is Dorico SE. The shocker is how powerful their free version is. Now, there are limitations to it. Dorico SE has a 2-player maximum, but Dorico sets their scores up in a way where it's not limited by instruments, but by the players who have individual parts. So if you really need to, you can set up a player with multiple instruments if you just need to get playback and hear the sounds of what you're trying to create. You can do that, but when you're printing parts, you're going to have 2 parts basically. The next thing that you should know is that while the act of inputting music is very familiar, you know, your left hand's on the keyboard, your right hand's on the mouse, you're doing your thing, the way you talk to the computer is different. It's still Shortcut City, which is the fastest way to work. You still want to avoid going up into the menus and looking for things. But there are these panels with these icons. So even as you're kind of searching for things, inevitably you kind of learn where everything is. And it's very intuitive. You just look at the picture and you're like, yeah, I want that. I want that roll. I want that articulation. I need a sharp. I need a flat. I need a quarter note. I need a half note. And as with any new program, you know, as I learn shortcuts, the ones that I think are going to be super valuable, like I know which key commands I'm going to be using often. And I'll write them down. I jot them down into a note or into a document. And I like doing this before I get the pre-made shortcut keys list, because in the natural progression of trying to do a project, I'll do the key commands that I'm used to, and I don't know how to do it, so I look it up, and then inevitably you're going to forget it. So if you just write it down as you're going through this process, you can quick reference your own shortcut sheet so that when you get a provided shortcut sheet by either Dorico or somebody else online, you're basically just adding to your arsenal of shortcuts that you have just in your head as you're working through things. This isn't going to be a how to use Dorico video because there's already a ton of really good ones online by Dorico and as well as other YouTube users. But things like how to add bars and take away bars, you have these popovers that you're using to actually talk to the computer. So as you're writing music or inputting notation, there's this feeling of talking to the software or talking to the computer as you're writing it. I'm not a computer coder, so I don't know if this is normal for people who are writing code all day where they do feel like they're talking to their computers. But it's just a different feeling. You know, I'll give you an example. This most recently, I had to learn how to do first endings, second endings, DSL coda, DCL coda. Once I learned about that popover window, just using that one window now, I can communicate if I want a DSL coda or a DCL coda. I'm not navigating through nested menus. I'm just talking to the software. So the point of this is that it's different. It's not like where you say, oh, Finale user is going to Dorico or Sibelius user is going to Dorico. One's going to be easier or harder than the other. It's just kind of a new way of interacting, inputting, and using notation software. Again, not better or worse. It's just different. So I'm a month and a half in now, and whereas before in the beginning, there were instances where I would have to go back to my old computer and still use Sibelius and Dorico at the same time, because there was something that I couldn't do or didn't know how to do in Dorico that I could do really quickly on Sibelius. And then gradually over time, as I acquired more skills in Dorico, I found myself having to reference Sibelius less and less, to the point now where unless I need to go back to Sibelius and pull an old project, I can pretty much do everything that I need to do at this moment inside Dorico. And I know that I haven't even scratched the surface of it yet. So if you have more questions about the actual process of me going through transitioning into Dorico, feel free to drop a question down below in the comments. I'll answer those down there. But I want to move now into sharing some of the reflections that I've had since jumping ship from Sibelius to Dorico. Number one, the resources that Dorico has created online for users to get up and running and learn how to use it are incredible. Whereas before I learned music notation software by reading manuals or talking to friends, one of the main ways I learn now is probably how you learn, which is looking up a video online. I go into Google and I search a phrase, Dorico, how to create DSL coda. And there are two paths of learning that are occurring. There's me going into the Dorico YouTube channel and watching the sequence playlists that have been laid out, and I'm just step-by-step learning how to use the program. There are a couple videos in particular that I would recommend. I'll link them down below in the description. There's the playlist of how to get started with Dorico. And there's one in particular called Time-Saving Input Options, where you can watch John Barron, International Product Specialist for Dorico, do several engraving things. And he'll show you like, hey, this is one way to do it. Here's another way to do it. And here's how I actually do it. And it's amazing. It's through the power of video. Without taking a class, I essentially learned how to use an entire software sitting at home, watching videos online. So all this to say is that Dorico has made a concerted effort to recognize how learning is taking place in the modern age. And there's written documentation and there's video documentation on how to use the software if you have the interest and the patience to sit there and watch and work through it. Highlight went out. All right, let's keep going. Okay, number two, Dorico is definitely applicable for teachers. For my teaching friends out there, you know you're making worksheets. You know that you're having to engrave a part. You know that you're having to create warm-ups. One of the things that I'm very excited about exploring and learning more about is something that my friend Lloyd told me about. And Lloyd is a professional audio engineer and teacher. He pointed out how Dorico is owned by Steinberg, which also owns and created Cubase. And so the interaction between Dorico and Cubase, you see it in this play mode inside of Dorico. The VST playback options, which are the virtual instruments, the Halion VST that comes with Dorico is already very good. But recently I've been watching some videos with the BBC Orchestra, so you can score something and have the BBC Orchestra playing back to you. That's kind of amazing when you're trying to get inspired, or maybe you have to deliver a mock-up, something that has good playback. But as a teacher, there's so many ways that I can imagine this tool being used in a classroom setting. So one of the examples that John mentioned was, as a teacher, you could have an account, you have an arrangement, you're sending out a score to a student. The student has a free version of Dorico SE, at which point they could open up the file in a read-only, and then they could print out just their part. Now let's imagine you're a teacher that's running some sort of computer lab for college, high school, or maybe even middle school. And you're teaching a variety of classes out of this computer lab. You're teaching a music theory class where students are doing rhythmic or melodic dictation. They're learning how to do 4-part voice writing without having to erase and rewrite. They're just moving notes around. They can use it to work out and produce final versions of harmonic analyses, beautifully laid out, something that can be used and submitted in a portfolio. And with the play mode and the integration with Cubase, you have another DAW to explore all sorts of creative ways of creating music. And this is especially useful for students who come from a traditional background of learning formal music, and maybe it's a non-traditional, non-classic, and they're used to working with MIDI blocks and keyboards, DJs and producer types. Or what if you want to load up a video clip and have students score their own section? I mean, the creative possibilities within this one program are kind of ridiculous, and it makes me wonder, man, what are all the projects that you could come up with if you had this one program at your disposal inside of a computer lab? Okay, moving along. Number three, in terms of learning the program, there's also a really active and robust forum for Dorico on Facebook. What I've seen is that the user community is very supportive. Everyone from power users to complete newbies asking a variety of questions, and people chime in. And so it's just a great way, even if you're just following along and lurking in the background. And you're getting responses from community users and Dorico team members. So it's a really interesting way. I've never learned a piece of software this way. Usually you're kind of in a hole by yourself. Maybe it's just the first time that I've adopted a piece of software in this day and age. and you're kind of doing it in a community swimming pool. It's pretty cool. Number 4, Dorico has something that I didn't even know about until I started really looking at it. That's very compelling for anyone who's already using music notation software, which is they have a competitive cross-grade pricing. So if you have another piece of music notation software that you're using, you actually have a special pricing. And even if you don't have that software, if you're an educator, there's an education pricing. And now I'm speaking specifically to the teachers here, because I know a lot of times teachers end up spending their own money to get the tools that they need to serve their students. So there's an education pricing for teachers and students if you show that you're attending school somewhere. And that is already a very sharp discount. I think it's like $200 off in the States, more than $200 off. And then on top of that, if you're one of those people who's running an older notation software, they have a competitive cross-grade pricing, which is even more discounted. If you own one of the listed non-Steinberg products and you can show proof of eligibility, there's an even deeper discount. And as a student or as a teacher, if you're investing the time into learning this product, even with Dorico SE, there's 3 versions of it. There's Dorico SE, there's Dorico Elements, and then there's Dorico Pro. The time that you would spend, say, learning Dorico SE, all those skill sets can then be springboarded into the next version or even the Pro version. Personally, for me, going to Pro is a must, because if you're doing any sort of full battery percussion and front ensemble, or even a full wind ensemble, and you're having extra players, anything beyond 12 players, you're going to need that Pro version. But even Dorico Pro 3.5 right now, which is the most current version, is a steal. And I'm trying not to make this a hard sell, but the reason why I'm pointing this out is because personally for me, this was one of the humps that I had the most difficulty getting over, which is spending money as an investment on myself at times. And I would say this has been one of the biggest changes in me over the last 2 or 3 years. The money and the resources that I've spent investing on tools or information to elevate my game has been huge. And if I can somehow go back in time and impart this advice on like the student version of myself or even the teacher version of myself, I probably would have done this sooner and with less guilt, because it's just opening more doors. If you have more tools and you have more abilities, you're going to be able to help more people. Even with this pricing and this product, I wouldn't say get it with the intention of making money with it. Using my path, that is a very viable option. But just in terms of investing in yourself as a musician, as an educator, as a creator of some sort, the value that you're getting for this tool, in my opinion, is a complete steal. And there are a number of reasons why I can imagine that they're doing this pricing. They're the newcomer to the market, they're trying to break in, and they're trying to make it accessible to the masses. I haven't even mentioned the pricing for multiple users. So if you're a teacher and you've got 5 or more students in the class, there's another discounted pricing for that. So the point is, pricing should not be a deterrent in this instance. For what you're getting, for the value, I think if anything, it's actually a pro. And the last thing I want to say about this from a personal point of view is that part of this transition was about trying to future-proof myself. With any piece of technology or software, it will eventually become dated. And with the other 2 big notation software programs, they're in the chapter of their life where they spend most of their time troubleshooting. You'll see this in the comments when people say things are crashing or licenses aren't being verified, or the list goes on. And then you have other newcomers to the market like MuseScore, which is amazing for teachers and students, namely because it's free and it can do notation input and playback. But it's one of those situations where you get what you pay for, and there are limitations within the program, limitations that very quickly, if you're moving into a prosumer or definitely a pro level, you're not going to be able to use that as a long-term vehicle. So all that time you spend learning the program, eventually you're going to hit a wall and you're going to have to look for another option. So in my pursuit to future-proof myself, there are a couple considerations here. Even though it's in the process of being developed, Dorico is in the phase where they're in this upward trajectory. They're still growing, they're still developing, they're still making things better. One of the things that you'll see is that they're very responsive to the community, issues that are coming up. They're actively solving problems and developing new features in the moment. Which takes us to the next interesting thing about the Dorico team, which is they are not doing this for the first time. In actuality, the core team behind Sibelius went to Steinberg and was given a chance to have another go at music notation. So essentially, what we're using and what we're seeing is someone's second attempt at building something. And if you've ever tried to create something or fix something in your house, the first time you do it, depending on your experience and how much you plan for it, like to buy, it's good. But at a certain point, there are just things that you didn't plan for. And chances are the second time you do it, it's going to be better. So I'll sum this video up by saying that switching to Dorico was partly inspired by gear. I have a new machine and I need new software to work on the new machine. Further motivated by my actual experience of downloading it, learning it, using it, getting excited about it. To lastly and mostly making a bet on the team behind Dorico. Something I don't talk a lot about on social media is that 2 years ago, I left regular teaching to join a startup. And one of the most valuable things I've learned from that experience is that the chemistry and the dynamic of a team comes from time. And that rapport and special sauce that comes with time, pressure, expertise, passion, on and on and on, that's something that cannot be forged in the short term. It just takes time, and if the ingredients are good, it just gets better with age.
If you've ever used another notation program, I'm only saying this because many people have, we have a Crossgrade price into the Pro version. And for some people, they've said, oh, well, actually, I'm going to start in the either at SE or Elements, and then I'll upgrade to the Pro version. I said, well, only a kind of saving money warning. Try the trial of Pro first because it's free. And if you like it and that's got everything you need in it, and you already own Sibelius or Finale, the Crossgrade actually is probably your cheapest way in, really, into the full version, rather than doing Elements and then upgrading it. In a way, you might as well go straight there.